everyone, and welcome back to Insights with Us, a podcast about the human experience. I'm Anastasia, a licensed professional counselor, owner of Happy Mind Wellness Company, a Colorado-based therapy company, and creator of this podcast. My goal of this podcast is to help you learn more about yourself. Growth happens when we get uncomfortable, which happens when we sit with new ideas we haven't sat with before. And I hope that we can work on this journey of personal growth and understanding together. As a disclaimer, there may be swearing in this podcast, but sometimes we get caught up in the human experience. It happens. And sometimes we can talk about difficult or activating topics. So be aware of your surroundings, and if you need to, put on some headphones. Remember that support exists for you if you want it. I am so grateful that you decided to join me today, and you aren't the only one. Today we are joined by Sadie. We get a little goofy as we dive into different types of grief. We talk about rejection sensitivity, and we talk a little bit about identifying the different parts of us that show up to protect us. I'm excited to let you all listen to what we have to say today and how we're processing it, and hopefully gain some insight into how we can talk about such difficult topics. So let's dive deeper, get a little uncomfortable, and create some insight today. I don't know. What do we want to talk about today? I kind of want to talk a little bit about the rejection sensitivity stuff, like we had talked about on the phone. I don't know. I feel like both of us have just been in a very anxious space lately.
No, I've never had anxiety in my life.
And okay, perfect segue, because you and I have this really fun habit of like, I totally have anxiety and I'm freaking out and I'm aware I'm in a doom spiral. And then anybody tries to validate it. And it's like, no, that's wrong.
That's wrong. I've never experienced anxiety.
I don't want to listen to you. So I
What's a
am
doom
purposefully,
spiral?
intentionally going to put myself in denial and argue with you just for the sake of arguing, because I don't like feeling this way. So why would I talk to you about it?
Yeah. Also, arguing is kind of fun.
It is kind of fun. Yeah. But then after the fact, things always are okay. And you're like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, I was anxious, but I totally got through it. And then the next time you're anxious, it's like, no, this is
This is
terrible.
the
I
end.
will never get through this ever.
Yeah. This is how I will feel for the rest of time.
Yeah. So I was
In
thinking
fact,
about
I
that this
may
week.
even give myself a heart attack. So,
No, nobody has ever died from a panic attack before.
you don't know that.
And it always ends
With death.
with death. This panic attack that I am having right now is going to kill me when I'm 80. It's the cause.
You never know. Although I am convinced I'm going to die of hypothermia in my 80s. But it's going to be like 80 degrees and
Really?
beautiful and sunny out.
What makes you think it's going to be hypothermia that kills you?
Because I'm so intolerant of the cold, and I feel like that's just gonna get worse with age. And I just like feel, but it's gonna be like a beautiful sunny day where it's like 80 degrees out.
You got
Like,
hypothermia from your air conditioning?
or I just like go for a swim and didn't towel off properly before like sitting out, and then I like hypothermia took me.
There are so many steps that have to happen before you die of hypothermia.
But it's actually a real concern though for older people. And like
Yeah.
this does happen.
But again, there's so many steps involved to getting to the death part.
I'm just saying, I think it's gonna happen in my 80s.
And
So
I feel
stay
like the
tuned.
people where that would happen to are not connected to their bodies, are not body workers or energy workers,
Well,
like
I'm planning
don't pay
on
attention
falling
to anything.
No, I'm planning. Okay, let me. I say I'm
Oh, it's a
planning.
plan now. Okay.
No, I'm expecting what'll happen is I'll like do something like go for a swim or something like that. And then I'm like, I'm gonna take a nap in the sun, but I won't towel off properly because I'm old and forgetful. And then I'll fall asleep. And while I'm asleep, I'll die of hypothermia.
Okay. And are you in this hypothetical world you've built? Are you in a relationship or has your partner already passed?
Well, I think I'm alone at this point. No one's
Okay.
there to check.
Okay, so I'm not even there.
Well, I'm on vacation. The story keeps changing and
Oh,
getting more complex.
and I'm not allowed to go on vacation with you.
No. Mm-mm.
Wow. You are a terrible friend.
Thank you.
We're living in the nursing homes together in our 80s.
Yeah.
Both of our partners have passed. We only have each other. And you're like, I need to go on this vacation by myself. Otherwise, I'm not going to die of hypothermia in the 70s. And that's my dream.
No, 80s.
No,
80s.
70-degree weather. Sorry.
Oh, okay.
70s
Yeah,
and sunny.
that's acceptable.
Yeah.
Or 80 and sunny. Really, it's just gonna be sunny and beautiful out, and that'll be how I go. I'm
Yep,
fine with
you're
that.
right. Complete logic. Makes so much sense.
And somehow this is related to panic attacks and anxiety.
Yeah, notice how your brain went into this huge hypothetical doom spiral of how you're going to die when you're in your
Oh,
80s. That
but it's
makes
not a spiral though. I don't feel doom about it. I'm just like, yeah, I feel like that's what's gonna happen. That just seems like
okay.
something that would happen.
But that also sounds like something someone with anxiety would think about.
I mean, maybe.
Maybe just a little bit.
No, I think what it comes from, it doesn't feel like it comes from anxiety. It feels like it comes from my hatred of being cold.
So it's like a angry reaction.
Yeah. Like it's like an angry reaction to like I get cold so easily that I will probably fucking die in really nice sunny weather from hypothermia.
You know, I'd rather die in really nice, warm, sunny weather than go really slowly and painfully, like in hospitals and like dealing with things. I want to go quietly in my sleep. I, because of, my needle phobias and all of my anxiety around like hospital
Yeah.
stuff, I just want to go. I want it to be a surprise. I don't want to have to worry about making hospital decisions. I just
Do you want
want,
to go on vacation with me in our 80s?
I'm in. This is slowly becoming like a suicide pact. I don't know if I'm okay with that.
No, no, it's just like we're not trying anything. We're just like
No.
going swimming and, we're
If it
80,
happens, it
so
happens.
yeah.
But
Maybe a riptide will
also,
take you.
I would care so much about you that I would make sure you toweled off properly and it would defeat the whole purpose of this accidental happening.
Well, then we can just agree to go on vacation and that'll be it.
Yeah, we're just gonna go on vacation in our 80s and we will come home safely.
My great great aunt actually traveled the world in her 80s. So, and she came
That's
back
cool.
to clarify. And then she lived to be 100. So,
Well, there we go. Maybe you get
yeah.
hypothermia in your hundreds.
Oh, I don't want to live that long.
Um,
Anyway,
this is making me think about how, for the longest time, I had a lot of fear and anxiety around death,
hmm.
but not the actual act of dying. But there were so many stories I was told as a kid about what happens after you die, from all the different
Hmm.
religions to the people that are atheists to just everybody has a different story or idea in their heads. And it's like what they need to get through. But all of the different stories just made me panic because I didn't know which one was right. And then it's like, I don't want to die because I don't know. And the
Yeah.
thought of just being nothing completely freaked me out. But the thought of any of the stories, oop, hit the mic, any of the other stories being real also freaked me out because I wasn't following any of their belief systems.
Yeah.
And so I never wanted to talk about it. I never wanted to think about it. And I had so much fear and anxiety around my parents dying that it just compounded.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So where are you at like now with all that like death anxiety?
I've gotten a lot better with it. I've kind of accepted that it's something that all of us have to go through. I think doing all the grief work I do helps with that. Of just,
Yep.
and the fact that I have lost people sense that anxiety and I've been able to work through it somewhat. There is also a monologue from Midnight Mass that
Yeah,
anytime the one about what is it, DMT? Is that it?
I think
The
so.
thing that breaks like you get basically overdose on this happy hormone in your body as you die. So it's just like this amazing joy experience based on what they
The
know
greatest
that
high of your
does.
life.
The greatest high of your life. You don't even know you're dying. And then at that point, I'm like, well, if I go on such a high note, if that is actually physiologically what happens in our brains when we die, then if nothing happens after that, I don't know if I'm really gonna care.
Probably not.
Probably not.
I oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I say go ahead and then I start talking again. I feel like I've actually had like like not resurgence, but like almost like a new anxiety around death because of the amount of grief work that I'm doing with clients. And it's just like, which is really interesting. That's not a reaction I was expecting to have because I mean, growing up, I grew up with the like Judeo-Christian story of like, if you don't believe in Jesus, you go to hell, you burn for all eternity. Which, a little bit of anxiety in that, and a lot of anxiety around like the end of times and like all the suffering that is going to lead up to that.
Sorry, quick joke, but burning in hell is better than being cold.
You're not wrong. Sometimes I
No.
actually do think about that, which is a weird thing to randomly
If
think about.
hell is real, I'll be
Anxiety.
so warm.
I'll be so warm. I won't be cold.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So anyway, I like, grew up with like a lot of anxiety around like the suffering that leads up to that. And then once I like kind of stopped believing, I just like didn't think about it ever. But then like randomly I got like really interested in death, which is not like in a morbid dark way, but in just like
A
it's
curiosity.
something that, yeah, and like a curiosity, and it's like it is a part of everyone's life,
Mhm.
like, but we don't talk about it in our culture. Like what, like I want to know more. So I actually ended up reading Ram Dass's book Still Here, which he
Okay.
has since passed, so he is no longer still here. But it's all about aging and death and dying.
Mhm.
And it was just like such an interesting way of viewing death and like the process. Because in like traditional, oh, I might be wrong, but in traditional Tibetan teaching, I think they talk about like the dying process, like each of the elements leaves your body. And so,
Mhm.
like, when wind leaves, you get really thirsty. When fire leaves, you get cold. But it goes through all of the, or not wind. When water leaves, you get thirsty. I forget what happened. And then wind is the last one. But it's talking about like surrendering to the process and like kind of just like this natural cycle and this like really kind of like lovely like embrace and acceptance and like openness that opening that happens at that time for a lot of people, especially when you know that it's coming. Um, and that like really changed my perspective a lot. And then I started working at the grief center and just hearing everyone's story of like the grief that they are currently going through and like the magnitude of their losses.
Yeah.
Um, like it's now like I really can't not think about death. Like, it's not like
Yeah.
a luxury of like, oh, I'm suddenly interested in it. I'm gonna read a book, put it away, not think about it. It's like
It's
I have
everywhere.
to think about this all the
Mhm.
time. And so
Yeah.
I've actually had like a little bit more anxiety about not my own death, like that I'm still whatever, but with like losing people. I'm just
The
like, oh gosh.
anticipatory grief.
Yeah, but it's like sometimes it's a little out of control where I'm like, I don't think I need to anticipate everyone's death right now. That
Yeah.
seems like a bit much.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, just like acknowledging like, but people do pass, and that's like, people are going to die. Animals are going to die. Like,
It's going to
I'm going to die.
happen. It's
Yeah,
universal. It's one thing that every single one of us have to go through at some point if we are alive on this planet.
yeah,
But I was thinking about that anticipatory grief too, because I feel like everybody thinks about it of, oh, you have lost somebody. But I think
Mm-hmm.
there's very few conversations around you're afraid to lose somebody
Yeah.
because you care so much about them. They're such a big part of your life. Of course, you're going to be sad about the thought of having to say goodbye at some point.
Yeah.
And not just, oh, they have cancer or oh, they have this other illness or they are on that path and they're going to go soon. Because that's almost like prepping yourself. You know it's going to
Mm-hmm.
happen at some point versus like, I have no idea when this is going to happen. You are healthy. Right
Yeah.
now, there are no signs that you are going to die. And yet I am overcome with grief because I don't want to lose you ever.
Yeah. And like, I don't know, that just like really makes me think of like the quote that grief is the price we pay for love.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just like, yeah, like you like that's like some especially like for people who have had major losses, like that becomes like a forefront or it comes to the forefront as far as like when you love so deeply, you also grieve deeply.
Yeah.
And it's just like a greater understanding of like what that like the importance and the magnitude of love in that way. Like it's terrifying then to think like, well, what happens when it's gone,
Yeah.
especially if it's gone forever, or even like, you know, the grief that happens around losses that like aren't death related. So it's like someone gets a traumatic brain injury and they
They're
aren't the
not the
same
same
person, or they get
person.
dementia, or you get sick and you can't live your life the way you wanted, or you know,
Yeah.
um and
Somebody
also
or
I was
someone has a huge identity shift and they are not that same
mhm,
person.
yeah, and like and especially since we identify ourselves so much through the relationships we have with other people, like I'm a daughter, I'm a partner, I'm a friend, and then it's whenever that other half of your relationship is gone, or you know they die, or altered in some way permanently, it's like you're just you. And like not to say like, oh, well, you stopped being a daughter because of this, or you stopped being a parent because it's like you still hold that part of you, and but that relationship with that person is just different now, and the grief is that relationship. And so it's just one of those things where it's like, and it's terrifying. I think especially since we don't talk about it
We
as a
don't talk
society.
about
And we
it. It
like,
isn't normalized.
yeah, well, it's funny too. So yesterday I was working at like a booth where we, you know, give out resources and stuff. And it was like we do a summer camp for kids who are grieving. And so we were at like this like youth summer event thing to like give information. And it's so interesting. The normal like response that we see from people is like they're walking by casually looking at all the booths. They read our sign, look at us, give us this like almost like shocked look, smile awkwardly, avert their gaze, and walk away.
Because it's
Um,
not safe to talk about.
yeah, and it's like death isn't even on the title, it's just grief. And
Mhm.
but then you get the people, and it's also interesting too, because even the people who do want the resources or want, you know, the support, yeah, either for themselves or their kids, they do a similar thing. Like they will look at it, they will linger without making eye contact, and then they won't acknowledge us a lot of the time. They'll just kind of like casually walk by, pick up a card, put it in their bag, and like walk off. Like they don't
Like,
acknowledge us.
I
They
need
don't.
this, but I can't let anyone know that I need this.
Mhm. Yeah, I don't
Hmm.
want anyone to know that I'm dealing with grief.
Yeah.
Or, you know, like maybe they don't want to acknowledge it, or, you know, it could also just be bringing up hard stuff in a public space, which is also totally valid. But it is interesting that it's like even the people who are actively going through grief
Yeah.
are like ashamed of it, or, you know, don't want to acknowledge it in that way potentially.
Well, and when you just said that, I was like, well, and it's totally fair that maybe they don't want to bring up something really hard in a public space, but it's that societal pressure that makes it a hard thing. Like,
Yeah.
yes, grief, dealing with grief is hard, but it is so universal. all of us have to go through it. The only reason it's, deemed too vulnerable is because society has decided we can't talk about it.
Yeah. Or even the fact that like I think it's in the DSM-5 now, the diagnosis of like prolonged grief disorder. It's
Mm-hmm.
like, okay, so if you're grieving significantly for at least 12 months, then there's something wrong with you,
Yeah.
which is wild.
It's so frustrating. And so much of my work, my grief work is, I mean, there's a lot to it, but a big part is trying to take away that timeline.
Yeah.
Because yes, time does help, but it only helps when you spend that time doing the work, letting
Hmm.
yourself oscillate between the grief and what you do want to focus on, not just distracting, not just numbing yourself. But there's also this piece of when we go through grief, whatever kind of loss it is, the first step is your body numbs itself to protect you from that feeling of loss.
Yeah.
And you stay numb until your body is ready to feel and process those feelings. And so numbness is literally the first step. But if you never go out of that first stage, either because you try, but it's so overwhelming with feelings that you just jump right back into numbness, or
Hmm.
you think that you can never go there, so you never try.
Yeah.
Well, it doesn't matter how much time you take, you're not going to work through it.
Yeah. And that's like the interesting thing too is just like, I mean, how different an individual each person's grief is, and it's different for each relationship. So it's
Mm-hmm.
like someone with multiple losses, their grief is going to look different for each relationship. There are some similarities, like, the numbness, the overwhelm, the like all like the brain fog, the fatigue, like there can be a lot of similarities, and it can also feel and look very different
Mm-hmm.
from person to person, from relationship
Yeah.
to relationship. Even just the time you're at in your life can be a huge thing as well. Or like there's so many factors that go into it that it's like, how can we
Yeah.
like decide that like this person's grief expression is okay, perfectly healthy, and this person's is wrong? And it's like
Mm-hmm.
it's hard because it's like, yes, I think that I've definitely seen where people can get stuck and, aren't able to process or don't know how, or, it's all consuming and it's really distressing for them and like they're not functioning. And that's like when it's like, okay, great, let's get some support, let's get some other tools, let's
Yeah.
let's bring some other people in, but it doesn't mean that you're wrong in the
Or
way
it's
you're doing this.
abnormal. It can be very normal
Yeah,
exactly the way you're doing it.
yeah, it's like very normal. And also maybe you need some support around it.
And on the flip side, sometimes there's a pressure to feel more grief than you actually do around a
Yeah.
loss. And
Yep.
sometimes the loss is actually what you need to feel relief or to feel better, like in traumatic situations, or if somebody wasn't very kind to you, or maybe you already did all the
Mhm.
processing ahead of time before the loss because you did have time to anticipate it.
Yeah.
And, sometimes I work with people where they're like, I feel like I should be feeling more, but they're in tune, they're doing the work, they're there. They just don't have as much grief as they were told they would. And then they also feel like they're doing it wrong.
Yeah. That's a another one too. Oh, something else popped in my head. It was maybe it's gone. Um okay, I'm sorry. My
I
brain
have
is
I have another thought that I can keep rolling with
go.
until your
Yes,
brain
please do.
thinks of it. So, one of my favorite models for grief, and it helped me a lot in reframing, and I cannot remember whose model it is right now. Maybe I'll look it up in editing and I'll add it in here. But it's the idea that, how do I want to frame it? So, like most people that have faith or have some sort of a religion are like, well, they're still here. And a lot of people use that as a comforting, like they're not gone, right?
Yeah.
And then people that do not have that type of belief system sometimes almost like that can hurt them of like, no, they're not still here. They're not in heaven somewhere. They're not like in their physical body. What I like is this idea of this loss of losing someone, and in this case, explicitly death, but even just in a breakup or whatever, you have lost. It's switching from this person, thing, job was a part of your external world.
Mm-hmm.
You interacted with it outside of yourself for up until this loss. Then this loss happened. That grief is a transition from this thing being a part of your external world to it now only being a part of your internal world. It is
Yeah.
still there, but not like literally physically in the external world somewhere, but it is still there because it was a part of you.
Yeah. And that's like really what I was saying at the beginning, when I was like, the grief is your relationship with that person. Like it is the new expression of that relationship.
Yeah. And it is the transition of accepting that that person or thing or job is no longer in the external world. That is a very hard transition to make,
Yeah.
especially if you don't want them to have left the external world.
Yeah. Well, and also it's also one of those things too where like I for also I'm like I know where my book is that I'm referencing, but cannot off the top of my head think of who it is. But anyway, like he lays out the tasks of grief, and so one of them is like acceptance that they're no longer here, or like no longer a part of your external world. One of them is like feeling the pain of the loss, and I should know the other two. Anyway, but
I think we're
it's
talking about the same person and the same model too, because it sounds identical.
probably.
Yeah.
But like, and the important thing though is that I think a lot of people also think like, oh, well, once I've accepted it, then I'm good. I've done the work. It's done. I can wrap it up in a nice little bow, and that's that. And it's like, nope. You're probably going to bounce around a lot. Like you might have acceptance one day or even 1 hour or 1 minute, and then later you're still in disbelief. You can't believe it happened. You can't believe that this loss happened, and you feel really lost and like discombobulated. And then you go back to being like, well, I know it happened. Like I'm accepting it. They're no longer part of my life. I'm forming a new identity, a new routine. And then yeah, it's just like this bouncing around and like really feeling the pain some days or months or whatever or minutes, and then coming out of it, and it's just like it's such a non-linear process.
It really is.
And I
And
think that makes it even scarier,
yeah.
like especially since we don't really talk about it openly in society or even with friends, or yeah, having this expectation of like, okay, well, you go through these stages, and then once you're done, you get your certificates and you never have to talk about it again.
And you have to get through all of those stages within 2 years or you're wrong.
Yes. Well, actually 12 months. So
I know
hold
the
on.
DSM has 12 months, but I've learned over time that like the societal pressure really starts to hit at about 2 years of like, you're still not over this. Uh,
Jeez.
or
That's
like
like the worst.
people,
The
yeah,
number of times I've had clients who are like, some people legitimately say that
yeah,
is so upsetting.
it's
It's
so
like,
upsetting. Or even if they don't really say it, it's like, well, this is all you ever want to talk about. And it seems like you're just always stuck in your grief. And I just can't be there for you anymore. It's that pressure of you need to get better because I don't want to deal with this
I'm
anymore.
uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And now I have to
And
think about death and loss, and I don't want to do that.
yeah. And like, that's not what grief is. And
Yeah.
if you have this norm or expectation of how it's supposed to be, and then you grieve and it looks nothing like that, it's going to cause so much doubt in your head around if you are okay or not.
Yeah. Or if you're broken, or yeah.
which none of us are. We're all just feeling it the way we need to in our bodies.
Yeah, and also it like this is like why I feel like I mean I feel like I could talk about like any counseling thing forever because it's like and then also the fact that like how you experience even just your body is going to change how you experience anything, but especially grief. And your attachment style is going to affect your grief. And like, there are so many other components that come into it that it's like, I don't feel
It,
like we can compare anyone's grief to anyone else's because
it's
it's like
not
all
just
so
one
individual.
layer. Yeah.
Yeah. And
It,
nuanced. And it's like different people are going to have different sticking points
mhm.
and different things that provide relief and different things that bring joy versus triggering them in a negative way. Um,
Yeah.
and it's just like, that's like all of it is okay.
All of it is okay. And, a lot of the work that we do is trying to create a safe space, right? But a lot of clients, especially if, and a lot of people, if they've gone through any sort of really bad trauma or a lot of really high anxiety situations throughout their life, safety doesn't feel safe.
Yeah.
If it's calm and quiet and they can be themselves, their brain flashes all these alerts of like, this isn't okay. We need to go find the chaos because that's what we're used to. And they can't even let themselves feel safe and
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. And then when you add like another trauma or something on it, it's like so much harder than to recognize when you're in like what we call doom spirals
Yes.
or anxiety. Oh my gosh, what anxiety? Oh my God, anxiety loop? Is that what we call it?
You
uh,
made my brain blank on words. Anxiety spiral.
anxiety spiral. Either way, we're spiraling.
We're spiraling.
We're spiraling, and it's just
It's
like
just
when
a
you're
chaos tornado.
yeah, and when you're in it, you often can't see that like everything outside, like like other things are okay. Like you're
Mhm.
okay. You just like feel like your entire world is completely turned upside down and that's how it's going to be forever and you can't see a way out. And then once it like passes, you're like, did I was that an overreaction? Did I overreact?
What made me think like that? None of that was true. And you can see it after. And then you go into another spiral and you're like,
Mhm.
this is never going to be okay.
This is how it is forever.
Um, Actually, one of the things that I do for myself, and I've started working with some clients on this recently, and I love that this is coming to my mind, is the separation between how your body is responding to the stress of the situation versus you and how you can actually handle it. Because so often we feel the stress because of a stressful situation. Of course, you're going to be stressed, but we conflate it with us. If
Yeah.
I feel stressed, that means I'm probably not doing this right. I'm failing. This isn't okay. But actually, you're just stressed because the situation is stressful and you're probably handling it all right. And as soon as you're done being stressed, you're going to be able to look back on it and go, oh, I got through that.
Yeah.
But if you can separate it out in the moment and say, well, of course I'm stressed. I'm dealing with this thing, but also I'm doing everything I can that is within my control. I'm working through the stuff that's out of my control, and I know this is going to pass. Even in the spiral, it almost takes some of that power away.
Yeah. I what just like really came to mind for me too was like you can really fuse with the anxiety. Like you become so fused with it. And I think that's where like my joke comes in sometimes, which like when you're like, you're experiencing stress, and I go, I've never experienced stress a day in my life. I am stressed. Um, it's just like because it
Mhm,
feels so fused and it feels like,
mhm.
yeah, like I become the anxiety or I become this. And it's like, yeah, it's hard to like find that separation sometimes. And
Yeah.
then once you're out of it, you're like, that was a
Mhm.
lot.
Yeah. Do you ever play the what if game with yourself where you actually go through the what ifs?
Sometimes it doesn't, I never know how to feel about it though.
That's fair. Because, especially if you're somebody with anxiety like us, it's so easy to think about the worst case scenarios and feeling like
Mhm.
everything is going to fail or go wrong. But I also know that if I have this whole list of things that are going to go terribly wrong, and I actually slow down and look at each of those items, whatever, if any of that does happen, excuse me, if any of that does happen, I know how to navigate each of those variables. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know which one is going to happen or if any of it's going to happen at all, but I actually know that if those do happen, I'm going to get through it. And so it's like I play through, I don't just have the what if panic. I'm like, okay, well, what if nobody ever listens to this podcast? Well, if nobody ever listens to this podcast, I'm having a great time talking with Sadie, and then I'm going to stop recording podcast episodes at some point, right? Like, even though my brain is like, oh God, but what if? Well, the what if actually isn't that bad if I play it out.
I feel like the reason I struggle with the what if thing is because like some of mine are so outlandish.
Yeah.
Like my what ifs that it's like, well, if it does happen, I don't know what I would do. That would be terrible. Or I'm just like, well, now I feel stupid for thinking that. So then I just shame myself, which is like not particularly
That is a
helpful.
whole other issue, though. Those are
I
negative
know.
self-talk things, versus, that's the fusion versus
Yeah.
separating it out. Or even if it's outlandish, like, well, if nobody listens to my podcast, then that means I'm a terrible therapist. Nobody's ever going to want to work with me ever again. And I'm going to end up homeless on the street. And then
I was
Juliet's going to
waiting
be
for the
dirty and
homeless part
sad
because
all the time.
that's from my brain always like my brain is like we have to maintain survival, which includes a house. And so any inconvenience will somehow lead to me
Yeah.
being destitute, homeless, and friendless.
Yeah, that's why I went there because I know your brain always goes to homelessness. But if you play that through, okay, if for some reason people not listening to your podcast is going to lead to you becoming homeless, let's just say for a second, the universe just aligns perfectly to lead to homelessness
Because of this podcast not being listened to
because of this podcast not being
somehow.
listened to, which I don't even get money for this. So
I
how is
was gonna
that
say, which we're
related?
not even making money off of it. So like
We
it
really are
really
just having fun.
a lot of things have to fall in place for this to happen.
So a lot has to happen for this podcast to lead to me being homeless. I'm so focused
Yeah.
on the podcast that I never make any money in my real job. And then I become homeless, right?
A
Even
few
if
other steps, but
I
yes.
became homeless, nope, that's it. That's it. Those are the only steps. Universal line, boom, I'm homeless. Um,
Good luck.
even then, I could get another job. I could move
Oh,
down to
see, that's
Durango and live
see,
with
in my
you.
scenario, I'm like, that's it.
That's because you stop at the what if. You don't play it
Yeah.
out of like, what would you actually do if you truly became homeless?
Oh, because then my anxiety still takes over and is like, well, if I become homeless, then I'm
Mhm.
going to die.
Okay. So, what would have to happen before you actually had death?
I mean,
Like, do you get sick?
hypothermia?
Are you just hit by a bus? That's it. You're done. Like,
No,
day one of being
hypothermia.
home. Hypothermia. Okay. So, if you became homeless, you would instantly die of hypothermia versus like reaching out to me and coming and moving in with me.
Well, in this scenario, I
Or
also, like I said though, in this scenario, I don't have any friends or social support either. A lot has to go wrong.
yeah, and you would never go to a homeless shelter? No.
No,
Yeah,
I'd
you're
be
too much
denied.
pride.
Yeah.
Do you see how though, like actually playing out the what ifs, like
Oh,
you're
no,
just trying to
totally.
be argumentative on purpose, and I
I would
appreciate it.
never.
Yeah, you would never be argumentative on purpose. Um, but even with you just doing all this outlandish stuff, it's like, okay, so you would never go look for a shelter?
Yeah.
There's not a
Like,
single person on this planet that you could reach out to and be like, hey, life just really shat on me this week. I am homeless and about to die of hypothermia. Can I crash on your couch? And no one would say yes to you.
not in this scenario. Parallel
Oh,
universe, bro.
yeah, your anxiety is a strong one.
I mean, or I'm delusional, either way.
Okay, what is coming up for me around this though is another separation, which is, I mean, yes, challenging the thought, CBT, whatever, all of that. But this installation of hope and the
Mm,
desire to actually work on it, right?
totally.
Because if you wanted to, you could have been super helpful during this what if scenario I threw out there. And instead, you were like, no, everything's gone. No, everybody hates me. No, everything's
Yeah.
wrong. Your brain is like, I don't want to get better. So I'm not actually going to work on this.
Well,
And
and like
go
also
ahead.
I was also for me, there is something that is actually kind of useful about what I just did, even though I'm like, no, in this scenario, that wouldn't work. That wouldn't work. Because it just feels more and more ridiculous
Yeah.
and less likely to happen.
Yeah.
Even though I'm not being helpful and I'm like purposely like, nope, that I wouldn't do anything. Like
Yeah.
everything's gonna go to shit. It's like I know that that's not true. And I like it just gets more and more ridiculous. Like now I have to be in a parallel universe and like,
It's so silly. And then you're laughing about it instead of being freaked out and anxious about it.
yeah,
And just like me, this is why we're soulmates, sarcasm works really well for you.
yes.
So the more argumentative you get, the sassier I get. And then we're just laughing with each other at the
Yeah,
end.
I was like, God, I hope that we are like, I'm not just like annoying people who are listening and then being like, okay, you're purposely making this difficult. And like,
Well,
it's like, well, yeah.
listeners that have made it this far and did not quit on us and have fully embraced this doom spiral that we just witnessed, this is what it can look like after the fact when you're argumentative or upset or frustrated, and then you can laugh about it. And then you process it after the fact, which builds
Hmm.
insight, helps you navigate it better next time. And you can look at it the way Sadie does as a tool of, no, I'm argumentative on purpose because it allows me to get more and more ridiculous, which allows me to diffuse from whatever's bringing me anxiety. Or it can be like me, where I'm like, I'm just going to be sarcastic and mess with you until you're laughing.
And also, it's like, yeah. I will say though, like, it is much harder when it's actually something that I'm like really genuinely stressed about.
Yeah, sometimes it takes us 2 hours to get to the laughing part,
Yeah.
but we
And
get
then
there eventually.
And then I realized that I need to do my FAFSA on the phone with you after all of that, and then you listen to me fill out forms, and
I
I'm
was
more
actively
stressed.
worried that day that I was being too mean to you and you were getting frustrated with me because I was sleep deprived and was getting that migraine and you were freaking out. I was like, I can't do anything but give you sass right now, so I'm just going to do that and I hope you're cool with this, but I'm here physically present with you, but also Sadie, just let it go. Please just
Let
go
it
throw a
go.
pillow.
And I'm like, no. Which, by the way, yeah, I don't have to. Yeah, oh, I told you already that because the government's being slow, it doesn't matter that I turned it on or turned it in technically late. So
So it was all fine and everything
all
I was
fine.
saying was true.
Yeah. Also, I was like straight up just like ignoring your sass. I was just like, whatever.
Cool. This is why we're friends. It works out. Which, okay, brings me back to the rejection sensitivity because both of us were just like, "Are you sure you're still my friend after that? I don't know if if you're okay with this." Like we both questioned it. Um, did you know that rejection sensitivity is more often than not a sign of ADD or ADHD?
I did not know that. Oh wait, no, I did know that. I just forgot.
That's fair. I also learned in my random internet deep dive after you and I talked about it briefly Dysmorphia, it comes from a Greek word that means unbearable.
Hmm.
So it's
Interesting.
like it's that feeling of this is unbearable, I cannot handle it. Dysmorphia about whatever it is. So it's like the really
Yeah.
strong, intense feeling is the dysmorphia, not necessarily
Yeah.
like an intellectual disconnect or break.
Oh, for sure. And with that, also, let me clarify. I did know that it had to do with ADHD because when I looked it up for myself, the only articles it came up with were in relationship to ADHD. It didn't come up as
Mhm.
like a separate thing,
Yeah.
which I was like, I don't think I have ADHD, but I definitely have rejection sensitivity dysmorphia.
Yeah.
Or dysphoria, wrong word. And the
Dysphoria.
reason like my therapist kind of like helped me identify that it wasn't just rejection sensitivity, but it was actually the dysphoric part of it was the fact that like my emotional reaction to perceived rejection is so out of proportion to what is actually happening that like that's a little more extreme. And like we were saying, like it's like when it happens, like I get so taken by the emotion and like stuck in it and fused with it,
Mhm.
and it like feels so big and so like life threatening essentially, that
Yeah.
it's like this really intense thing. And the interesting thing, related, I promise, is that so in acupuncture today, she was doing some like energy work and she was saying, you know, like there was this block in my heart space, and she was like working with that, like she said it was like a younger version of me that was like
Mm.
protecting that space. And so she was doing some work like conversing with that younger part, whatever. And so afterwards I asked her like how old she perceived that part to be, because like I was like, I honestly have no idea. And she said 3 or 4. And what
Mm.
she said is that a lot of people, like that's really common, that a lot of people have like this like toddler version of them that are like kind of volatile and like big emotions and like kind of protective. And it's because like when you're that age and you know like actively that age, it takes a lot of wisdom and intelligence in the adults around you to be able to hold those big emotions in a way that feels validating and not shutting it down or telling you to go sit in the corner or sending you away and making you feel isolated and rejected. And
Mm.
so she was just like talking about like kind of reconnecting with those parts and like being able to hold that space for yourself, um in order to like kind of approach this like rejection sensitivity, is like maybe is this part of you that's like very young and that learned that like these big emotions aren't okay,
Yeah.
and it's like a threat to your safety and to being
Mhm.
part of like a group that keeps you alive.
Makes so much
And
sense.
yeah, and so I was like, oh shit, like that checks out for me anyway.
It really checks out. I have this meditation that I love. I can't remember if I've talked to you about it before or not, but basically you identify a difficult emotion that you struggle to feel or exist in
Mm.
or sit with. And then the meditation takes you back younger and younger in time to different
Ooh.
moments where you felt that thing. And it
Yeah.
takes you all the way back to the first time you can remember feeling it.
Is
And
this part of the EMDR?
no, so I got this, I want to say from the ACT yoga book I have.
Oh, okay. Because I feel like
And
you've done something similar when we've done like practice EMDR sessions.
I also did the my ACT stuff with you though when we lived together, which was the yoga ACT stuff. So you might have done this with me back
Like,
when
I don't remember. I just know that we've done something.
I first got that book and I was like trying out the meditations before I did it
That's
in
right.
session. So that was one of those.
Okay,
And
okay.
everyone I've ever done it with, myself included, always finds that first memory between the ages of like 4 and 6,
Mm-hmm.
like every time.
Yeah. Well, and like the one that, and I'm like, yeah, I don't know exactly how old I was, but when she was talking about it, like a memory came to mind. And I was like, I don't know how old I was during that memory, but like I remember feeling that way. And I remember the reactions of the adults, which was like, just stop.
Yeah.
Like you need to like keep it to yourself. Basically, the message was like, I can't handle it. You need to do it on your own.
You're
It's also not
alone in
okay.
this.
You're alone in this, and it's not okay that you're feeling this way. So
Mm.
you need to stop, or at least don't express it, which is such like a common, so common message because it's like, and that's the thing too is like if there are parents who are listening who have toddlers and they're going to be this fear of like, oh God, I'm ruining my child. But like there's so much space for like compassion for yourself too because like and for like the adults in your life who weren't able to be there because it's like if you or your parent or whoever wasn't aware of that within themselves, then they can't hold that for the toddler.
Yeah.
Because it's like they're holding theirs and the toddlers, and like the toddler is triggering what's in them. And so it's just like
Yeah.
it takes a lot of like intentionality and insight and practice.
And
And we're not going to be
emotional work.
perfect. And even when you've done all that, you're still not going to be perfect. And
No.
like that's okay. Like it's
And
okay.
it's okay to not handle it right in the moment, even if you have done that work.
Hmm.
What matters is that repair attempt.
Yeah.
Can you come back after the fact and go, hey, you had some really big feelings. I wish I had sat with you in the moment with them and I didn't know how. Can we sit in them together now?
Yeah.
Right? Like you can always come back. You can explain that you didn't handle it right because you're human. And the little kid isn't going to handle it right because they're human. And maybe you can figure out how to handle it together after the fact once everybody's calmed down.
Yeah. Well, and also it's just like, and then that dialogue is teaching them like resilience for themselves too, of like, and compassion. And because it's
Mhm.
like, then in the future, like when they're maybe out of that developmental stage where they are just so volatile and
Yeah.
whatever, but maybe when they're older and they have like a big thing come up, they can talk to themselves in a way that's like, wow, I'm having a really big emotional reaction. I didn't handle that the way I wanted to, but like now I'm ready to sit with myself and
Yeah.
like process this. And that's
And if I
huge.
had a
Like,
really big emotional reaction that I didn't want to react that way in front of people, I can now realize after the fact that I need to go back to them and do a repair
mhm.
attempt and not just pretend like nothing happened.
And also how much more valuable in some instances is that than being perfect all the time.
So
And
valuable.
like, because if you let's say like you are perfect all the time, somehow you're an angel from heaven or something. I don't know. Um, you live in a parallel universe, but
Literally,
you're
you're not
like,
human is the only way you could be
yes,
perfect
yeah,
all the time.
yes,
Hear
clearly
this.
you're not human. And you somehow are like perfect 100% of the time. And you always respond perfectly and they always feel validated and all of these things. It's like, great. But then what happens when they're human and they mess up and
And you meet them.
they don't have the script for like how to relate to that or how to repair that within themselves or with other people. Like it is
Mhm.
so valuable to do that reparative attempt.
Yes, it makes all the
So,
difference.
yeah.
And seeing the effort, that
Hmm.
matters more, I know, to me than whether or not you do it right the first time. Are you
Yeah.
trying to work on it? Are you trying to talk to me about it? Are you trying to work through this and process it? To me, that's what brings connection. Not
Oh,
whether or not
100%.
you got upset because you had a really bad day. Again, you're allowed to have your feelings.
Yeah. It's
Uh,
just, yeah, what you do sometimes after the fact.
yeah.
Now it's like obviously things like hitting or abuse, like not cool. Like
Hmm.
that's a whole other thing.
No.
And that's really like not what we're talking about.
That
just
is
just
not
to
knowing
clarify.
how to emote and using your physical abilities to channel that emotion.
Yeah.
You're not actually
Like,
emoting.
yeah. Uh,
Um, this is
yeah.
reminding me, um, it was, I don't know if it was a speech or originally a video by Gabor Mate. and somebody did one of those like doodles where they drew it out while he is talking. And it's a
Oh
YouTube
yeah.
video. And so Gabor Mate is talking about it's within the context of like how addiction exists.
Mm,
But basically, before we had big societies and cities and this kind of culture that we are in now, everyone had to be more individualized. Everybody had to have their own skill and their own abilities and their own way of focusing. And, hunter gatherer times, even some people had to go out and hunt, some people had to kind of stay, some people gathered. Everybody had their own skill. Everybody was very creative, and you had to be creative in order to keep everything moving. And then, society progressed, evolution happened. We have these giant cities now. The individual creativity is less valued.
hmm
And it's more, you need to fit society. You have to fit into this little box. And if you don't fit
Yep.
into this little box, you are seen as wrong, which ties to a whole bunch of other things we have talked about
Yeah, I was
today.
like, my brain just went so
Yeah.
many other directions.
And so the example that he gives is actually toddlers. And when you are a little kid, you're going to want dessert or some sort of treat or something because you're a kid and you like candy and you like sugar and it tastes good. So, in the example he gives is, let's say you ask your parent for a cookie, but you haven't had dinner yet. If the parent goes, "No, you can't have a cookie until after you've had dinner." Well, you're a kid with big feelings. You're probably going to start crying. The typical response is something along the lines of, "Ooh, are you going to cry or are you going to be a good girl?"
Mm,
You aren't going to get the cookie at all if you react like that. Do you want to have a cookie at all today? Then you need to be quiet. And what that
yep.
is saying is you're not allowed to have your feelings. You're not allowed to be your own person. You have to fit into this box or you are wrong. And it is just tiny little comments like that that take away our individuality, take away our creativity, and end up creating all of these blocks for us being our true selves.
Wow, that's wild.
Mhm.
Also, like, it also just makes me think, like, God, I just feel for parents.
It's so
Like,
hard.
yeah,
I couldn't
like to
imagine.
clarify, the last thing I want to do is to like shame anyone
No.
for the way they're parenting. Like just to clarify, because it's like, gosh, like what an impossible job.
Yeah.
And
And
also like we're working with our own conditioning and
mm,
like oh like and also society as a whole is like sending these messages separate from the parents, and it's like
yeah.
even if like the main caregiver isn't the one saying these things or showing these things, like they're getting it so many other places,
Yep.
and we are social creatures, so it's like you're gonna have some type of conditioning, and how it lands with you is so individual to like
Mhm.
your parents and your genetics and your like your heritage and just like how you process things. And
Yeah.
yeah, it's just
And
so complex.
oh my God, right back to what we were talking about with grief, too. We are told there is a right or a wrong. This is the path. This is what
Mm-hmm.
you need to do to be a good parent. But every parent is different. Every environment is different. Every kid is different.
Mm-hmm.
So you could, on paper, be the absolute perfect parent. But because your kid isn't like everybody else's kids, because they're their own person, you could do everything right and still not give them exactly what they had decided in their minds they needed.
Yep. Or you have like the best of intentions and you're doing everything this way, and they
Mhm.
take it through their own filters or their own understanding and their own experience
Yeah.
and get something completely different than you
Yeah.
could have ever anticipated.
Like my parents were really great, loving, caring parents. I have zero trauma from them trying to be good parents. It is so many good intentions there. And
Yeah.
yet I still came out anxious with perfectionistic tendencies and have a whole lot of shit that I am working through. But it's not because they didn't love me or they didn't
Yeah.
do their absolute best.
Yeah.
It's because I'm my own person. And sometimes they didn't give me exactly what I needed when I needed it.
Yeah. Because they're also human.
They're human. They can't read my mind. They don't know. And now, after the fact, I look back on it and go, oh, that's what I needed in that moment. But I couldn't identify that or ask for it at the time.
Yeah, it's like you had no context. You
Yeah.
had no way of knowing.
I had no way of knowing that's what I needed until I
And
did
they
this
didn't
work.
either.
Yeah.
Because it's not like it's not like you came into the world with like a little manual that's like, this is how to raise Anastasia to make her this way. Like, it's just like, well, this is your first time meeting this human.
Wait, you didn't get a manual?
Did you?
Yeah, I reference it every time I get stuck.
Oh, maybe this is why I get stuck in doom spirals.
Yeah, you need to work on that. The manual's really useful. Maybe you accidentally burned it in a rage or something.
That checks out, actually. That seems like something I would do in a rage.
All over it, like, do not burn. This is the manual for life. And you're like, nope, I'm out.
Done.
I'm gonna figure it
I
out
don't
by
need a manual.
myself.
I'm making my own way.
Now,
Damn, I wish I had that. That would be helpful.
life is so hard and complicated, and there's so many layers to everything that every time you think you have something figured out, it just opens up like 100 more
Yeah.
questions.
Right now, since I've been processing the rejection sensitivity dysphoria with my therapist, I just like in the first session, I was like, now that I know that it's there, I see it fucking everywhere. Like
Mhm.
I was like, it feels so big and so pervasive in like every area of my life. I was like, what it feels like is like it's like some character walks in and I'm like, wait a second, that's a fake mustache and a bolo hat. Were you wearing a dress earlier? I think it's you. Um, but I was just like talking about this, I was like, it feels overwhelming because of how pervasive it is. Like it's everywhere. It's in every relationship. It's in so many different areas. Like I don't know how to approach this. And she was like, well, what if we just do one piece at a time?
What if you
I
don't
was
have a
like,
plan
okay.
to how to approach it and you just let it exist and notice it?
I know, but I want to approach it.
Yeah. Well, that's the other thing when I was kind of looking it up, that all over the internet, it's like CBT and DBT is unhelpful for rejection sensitivity. It's like, yeah, because it's not logical.
It's emotional.
It's emotional.
Yeah.
And I'm curious how
Well, and it's also
you're choosing
survival.
to navigate it. Because I have a theory
Yeah.
in my mind of what I would do and what I like how I would navigate it, but I want to know what you've come up with.
Well, as you may or may not know, I really love parts work, and I never
Yeah.
mentioned that.
Hmm.
So right now I'm doing that or approach through like kind of that lens. So I mean, still trying to figure it out, right? Like it's still in very much in process. We haven't
For sure.
come out the other side yet. So right now I really am just like identifying anytime it shows up in like some sort of new outfit, and I'm like, wait a second, are you rejection sensitivity? I think you are. So right now, like that's the stage I'm at.
Kudos to you for
But
noticing it in different outfits though, because that's so hard.
and sometimes it's really subtle. You're
Mhm.
like, I'm just a perfectionist, and you're like, oh, this is rejection sensitivity as well. Anyway,
'Cause you're afraid that if you're not perfect, you'll get rejected.
yep. And
Yeah.
failure equals rejection.
Well, of
So
course. Of course.
obviously. So right now I'm just doing that, but then I have also done like a few journaling exercises where I like talk to this rejected part, which
Mm.
is kind of interesting. And then really I feel like the thing I'm getting ready to do next is I'm reading No Bad Parts right now, which is all about
Oh,
internal
yes.
family systems. So I'm going to be doing the like mapping your parts exercise soon. So I don't know
Cool.
what that'll reveal, but basically my intention is like to find a way to almost like befriend or at least understand this like rejected part. Um and to just like understand like what purpose it serves and like why like why it's around, like because it doesn't just like these things don't just come up for no reason. Like these
Hmm.
parts don't develop out of the blue for no, like they serve a function at some point, and like to keep you safe or to get you love or to feel whatever. And
Hmm.
then at some point, like the usefulness of that particular way of doing things is no longer useful, or it's hurt, or it's harming, or it's just preventing the next stage of growth or connection or whatever it may be. So I'm working on, yeah, just like identifying it, trying to get to know it, understand it better, and then ideally getting to a point where I can kind of like accept it,
Yeah.
like have some appreciation towards it, and then be able to eventually
Yeah.
turn towards it like with love when it comes up and being like, oh, this part of me comes up when I'm feeling XYZ or when this need isn't being met or
Mhm.
whatever, and then working to meet those needs of that part.
I think one of my favorite parts of parts work is that once you can name your part and can start identifying it, it takes away that fusion.
Mm-hmm.
Because until you can see that that part exists, it feels like it's just you.
Yeah.
This is just me. Of course, I believe this. This is true. This is real. This is me.
Yep.
And it's like, oh no, it is this part of me that keeps showing up. Just noticing and naming it in that way creates the separation. And then
Yeah.
you're less fused. And that allows you to work with it, even if it's completely overwhelming, as something within you versus you.
Yeah. Well, and the interesting thing, which this is also like a very common theme throughout my experience in life,
Mhm.
is once I identify a part, my usual initial reaction is to be like, "Well, can't you just go away?"
Oh my God, it's like you're human and get uncomfortable in uncomfortable situations.
Yeah. Well, it's just like a funny it's like, "Okay, great. I found you. You can leave now. There's the door.
Yeah.
Why are you still here?"
Now that I know
Um,
you're not actually me, I don't want you here. You are not welcome. Please
yeah,
go.
and then without fail though, when that's my reaction, it like digs in and gets
Yeah.
stronger, and it's
Yes,
like, oh man, that didn't work this time either.
because you need that part for a reason. It showed up for a reason. And when you try to get rid of it, it feels like it still is needed. So it's going to fight you on you trying to kick it out because it's trying to help you. And until you can
Well,
validate it, it's like, no, I have to stay. You need me.
and also I think like another part of it too is that like by like truly by rejecting like this part, like I would also be rejecting a part of myself. Like I'm
Mhm.
rejecting myself on some level. And so it's like a true practice in like self-acceptance and like
Yeah.
compassion and um so yeah, I think like it is funny though, like without fail, every time this is like the cycle I go through where I'm like, okay, you can leave now. And then it digs in and I'm like, oh fuck, I have to like get to know you and like learn to love you.
Yeah.
Oh,
You got to get to know and love all of your parts because there's no bad parts.
there are no bad parts, or so the book
They,
says.
every part of us exists for a reason. It's all adaptive.
Mm-hmm.
And instead of hating and trying to get rid of it, if we can just understand it and recognize why it's there and what it's trying to do for us, it becomes easier to accept and love it versus
And
this is only bad. How could you be here? I hate this.
and the other thing that I really liked that I read in the book so far is that like like the vast majority of the parts, like when you engage with them and you find out like their purpose and like why they exist. And then it's like you can also ask them like, okay, well, what would you want your role to be if you didn't have to do XYZ?
Mm-hmm.
And usually it's like actually a really adaptive and helpful role that it can take on. So
Yeah.
it's like one of the examples they gave is like a protector, instead of being like really combative, like if it's given another option, it just wants to help you set boundaries so that you're safe and protected. And that's a super valuable role that it can take on. So it's like
Mm-hmm.
by accepting and working with the parts, then you can
Yeah.
actually like develop into like like take the next
The
step in growth and be
some
have better coping skills.
yeah. Some imagery that came up for me in some work that I've done recently with somebody. Um, but it's how my brain pictures it is like that protector part when it's really combative. It's almost like a SWAT team. Like it's coming in with all the riot gear, like
It's
it's
like, I'm
ready to
fucking ready.
go.
Let's
It just
go.
like drops from the ceiling and is like instantly fighting, right? Like,
I'm
nope,
think
gotta
I don't know.
react.
Sorry, not to interrupt. Well, to
Yeah.
interrupt. Uh, it makes me think of that scene from Monsters Inc. when all the like little
Yes.
guys come down to like,
Yeah. So
yeah,
those are your protective parts just freaking out, ready to attack,
because
right?
there's a sock,
Like
God forbid.
you have called me, I am here, right? Versus like a chill old about to be retired security guard that's just like chilling, doing some perimeter sweeps. It doesn't have a gun, it's just got like a baton kind of thing and a flashlight. And that part just
You're
kind of
like,
comes in like, hey, that might be sketchy. Do we want to do something about that? And then you get to decide.
yeah,
He's just there to do the perimeter sweeps. He's kind of harmless, but he's still a protector.
yeah,
And if he needs to, he can call in SWAT, but he doesn't need to be SWAT.
yeah. That doesn't need to be the first call every time.
Exactly.
Like, like, oh, you said something and someone didn't laugh at your joke. You don't need to go into a full panic about
SWAT
how
team.
no one actually likes you. It's like,
Nobody does like you. That joke was terrible.
oh, okay. Well, I'll keep SWAT team on call then.
And this is all going back to, I think, like, what does your body need? How is this part trying to help you? But also, like you said, it doesn't really need to help you in that way anymore.
Yeah,
It came around for a reason, but maybe that reason isn't helpful anymore. So now you are combative with the part because it doesn't need to have that role, but it doesn't have a different role to shift into. It's
yeah,
all about recognizing and naming, but also giving your nervous system a chance to heal.
yeah,
Because if you can heal your nervous system from a parts place, from a somatic place, not necessarily from a CBT, DBT place,
which they have their place, like
they
their
have their
purpose. Yeah,
place, but not necessarily for like this type of work, like the
yeah,
rejection sensitivity. Or like, I probably wouldn't use CBT for grief work ever because
no.
that's not what your body, your nervous system needs. What it needs is
Well, yeah,
permission to slow down and notice.
yes. Oh man, I forgot what I was gonna say. Oh, I know
Um,
what I was gonna say.
okay.
Okay, so I think the coolest thing though is when you actually do successfully like befriend your parts, and then like especially one that was really maladaptive at one point. Like, because I've done
Hmm.
that with like one of mine, and it's like when it comes up, it still can feel really intense. But I can go, oh, it's you. You're here. You're trying to tell me that I'm not feeling supported and I feel like I have to do everything on my own. And you're just letting me know that I need to reach out to my support system.
Yeah.
And that is like such a better feeling than
Yeah.
just like, like, yeah, going down this like path of being like, you're right, no one does like me and no one
Yeah.
supports me. And I have to do this on my own by doing XYZ. It's like such a cool experience when you do finally like truly befriend a
Yeah.
part, especially a hard one.
Yeah, for me, the one that I've connected with a lot recently, but I also feel that love towards is my like vulnerable child part that always
Oh,
shows up when I feel like I'm not allowed to use my voice.
yeah.
And I get anxious and I shut that part wants to shut down. I almost picture that part of me running and hiding in the closet, but I don't have to do it. And I
Yeah.
just like go walk over to the closet. I'm like, hey, friend, do you need a hug? Like this is really scary, but I can see where we still have control and where we can still use our voice. Like you don't have to use your voice right now if it's too scary. But like I've got you. Like
Yeah.
I get to care for that scared, vulnerable part instead of just becoming that part and hiding myself.
Yeah.
I love it. Heart's work is amazing.
I know. I'm like, I really love it. So,
Yeah.
anyway.
Are you having any other thoughts about anything we've talked about today?
Oh, probably, but that would be
Right
a whole
now,
other
off
episode.
the top of your head.
Uh, I mean,
Okay.
I think like in summary, I really think that it's like we have so many different pressures that come at us from so many different places. And like if you're someone who is intentionally trying to heal or grow, like it is a hard job a lot of the time because there are so many factors that come in. And like the path you take to heal is going to look so different for you because you have different parts to heal, you have different things that have come up, and so it's just like finding ways to be gentle with yourself on like whatever journey you're on, whether that's grief or confronting more difficult parts or rejection sensitivity. And it's like we said in the I think one of the first episodes, like it's all about trying to approach it with curiosity and compassion.
Thank you all for listening today. I loved catching up with Sadie and processing how we view grief, our interactions and reactions, and how we show up in the world. Hopefully, you enjoyed it too. If you have any questions for this podcast or any themes you'd like us to focus on in the future, send us a message on Instagram at Insights With Us Podcast, or send us an email at insightswithus@gmail.com. If you enjoyed this podcast and want to hear more, please follow, like, or subscribe. If you want to financially support the continuation of this podcast, you can donate. To do so, visit my website and donate on Podbean's Patreon program, or find Insights With Us on buymeacoffee.com. I appreciate you, and I appreciate that you're listening. Thank you for creating insight with us.